I'm start off by saying we're from Vancouver, which is, of course, the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, and so we want to acknowledge that. The section, oh, and also, pardon me, to say thank you, Jackie, very much for inviting us here, and thanks very much for the Federation of BC Writers for inviting us as well and making space for us, and for everyone here who took time out of their days to be here. Much appreciated. The section that I wanted to read from, it's called Looking Back. And in this, I take more of a metaphoric look at going back in time and looking at signs. And Tony, as you'll hear, is taking more of a nuts and bolts approach. Okay. When we look back, we peer through the lens of today. We form a theory of the past and then go searching for proof. It's why we yearn for a diagnosis, a name for what we are seeing. Without one, the symptoms lack definition, or only fearful suspicions that, like the nightmares of our childhoods, become something to dismiss. As children, we know with conviction that to reach the bedroom door, we have to take a flying leap from the bed to avoid the snakes that live underneath. Same with that closet door. To open it at night when the lights are out ensures that a monster will jump out. As adults, of course, we laugh at these memories. And at first, we might think that the glitches and blips that form the early warning signs of Alzheimer's are the adult version of snakes under the bed. We tell ourselves they are not indications of anything serious, but of course they are. The signs increase in number and intensity until we can't dismiss them any longer. They're leading to one clear conclusion, and we ask ourselves, why didn't we notice any sooner? We did. We just didn't know what it was we were seeing. Okay.
I could tell you right now, it never occurs to anybody they have Alzheimer's, or even that they might have it. If they have any blips, it's because they're tired, they drink too much, life's too fast, it's too much to do, it's the weather, a brain cramp, dozens more. Everybody has excuses for those memory gaps and foibles and brain cramps, basically, with too much regularity, I think. Yeah, perhaps they are older. They might have vaguely considered it, but most of us aren't, so that old anyway. They hear about it though. It's on TV, conversations at get-togethers, and people's jokes about senior moments and that kind of thing. But that's usually not on your radar. It's all on everybody else's. It's way out there somewhere. So it just doesn't register. I used all of those creative descriptions to describe the strange memory blips I was having. And eventually just became too much to ignore. But I thought, I can't have Alzheimer's. That's that black cloud that's supposed to be lurking in the future for all of us who are now early seniors, meaning we're young, but we're not old either. And so we're mature. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mature, that's it, yeah. And it certainly couldn't be me. I mean, I had that flypaper brain that everything stuck to. And the one in the newsroom that everybody came to and asked, what about this, what about that? Who was this, who was that? Or spelling, or just random knowledge. Like I said, I had that flypaper brain. But there came to a point where this wasn't working anymore. It just didn't work. I was forgetting things regularly, little things like someone's name, whom I hadn't seen for a while, but should have known. The directions I had followed some time ago, but were now foggy. I had to search for words a lot more, or names or other information that should have been retrievable after a little thought, but I used to be able to do it like that, but not anymore. I have to think for a Was it all the sports injuries I had when I was young? I had a wild and crazy period when I roamed North America and Europe, learning about life and generally leaping into it with the help of a few banned substances, of course. Maybe it was a result of some of the brawling I did when I was young, not out of desire really. It's just I was in circumstances where it was required. And I had a lot of depression when I was young. There was years of depression. It might have been a journalist disease, delving into human tragedy. I don't want to make a big thing of it, but some of the stuff is pretty horrific. You know, consoling people when you go to talk to them about their thing and you ended up consoling them, sometimes helping them out. Drinking, of course, just trying to get with the business. But I just didn't believe it was me. All those things I thought, you know, I could cope with. Certainly never believed I had a drinking problem, but it was steady. Maybe it was continual bumping up against tragedy, I think. In my later life, I think I discovered that I was not as strong as I thought it was. You see some pretty awful stuff when you're a journalist. Besides, I was the ultimate viewer of the human condition. I mean, out here, and I was viewing it, and I couldn't quite figure out what I was getting into. And I was also very good at soothing everybody. Sometimes I would have people I didn't interview constantly calling me for help. I guess I had some knack for it. Sometimes they'd ask me for arrangements for like funerals and things like that, and I almost did it until I remembered the code that you don't see. You see and tell the story, you don't be part of it, and that's what I said. But anyway, the ultimate irony is now all that's wrong, and I'm living it. So I'm living the whole story that I was.
You are
writing.
the story.
Yeah, I'm the story. I was writing it for years, and now I'm it. And, so
I can see why your mind wouldn't go straight to Alzheimer's, because you were really young when this started happening to you.
Yeah.
relatively, yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'd say early 50s, if not 40s. When we look back, like initially it was that fall, age 61, then we went bang, there it is. We could actually identify it. But we had been noticing gaps, you know, things going wrong throughout Tony's 50s and even back into his 40s.
I had some head trauma many times, many years earlier than that. I had played football and got knocked out a lot, all that kind of stuff that you do when you're male and young and stupid. But I don't know if it, I guess now I think that probably affected it. You know, you start reading now and you realize, oh yeah, all those times you hit that, you killed something.
Let's talk about some of the signs that you saw. And Tony, I'm not sure, did you notice them as much as June did?
Probably not, but I had other ones that, there was a couple, even before I left, well, there was one that really got me. I had just finished or just left, and it started my own business, really helping people do books. And I had one that was a woman who had, I can't remember what her business was, but you know, I wrote some of it, and I showed it to her, and she just went crazy. She said, like, I thought I hired this great writer, and this is horrible. This is crap. And I'm like, whoa. And of course got a little angry, but because obviously we had not been on the same radar. But then that really got me thinking, like, wait a second, maybe she had something. What was going on? Why would she say that?
Yeah.
That's such a difference from the feedback that a professional journalist with such accomplishments and such abilities, the feedback must have just really thrown you for a loop.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Who expects that? You have this self-image, and all of a sudden somebody just shoots you down, and it's really quite hard. I mean, I was angry too, but and then I had a couple more incidents, sort of vaguely like that, but they were nowhere nearly that rough. So I just stopped doing it, and that's when I realized something was going on pretty badly.
Yeah. How about you, June? When did you, I mean, obviously you talk about them in the book, but what were some of the early warning signs?
I'd say that once Tony had that fall, there were many incidents after that of leaving stove elements on. There was a kitchen fire at one point, a few things, those are sort of the typical things, but it made me go back and look back in time and start to analyze other things that had happened. And one of them that I write about is that my family used to refer to Tony as the absent-minded professor, because he was always his head was off somewhere else in the clouds thinking of stuff, and so things would happen. And one time, I hope you don't mind me telling this one, we were at my aunt's place, and she had a sliding screen door. And Tony just in that moment was back to when screen doors used to swing outward. And so he came marching out the door to say something to my brother-in-law and went right through the screen door because it was sliding, and sort of ended up standing on the veranda holding the screen in both hands. And just everyone cracked up laughing. They thought it was really funny. And the nickname got started then. But it was one of those things where there were a lot of little incidents like that. And you know what writers are like, and all of you here who are writers know this. You notice something like that and you file it away in the back of your head. It goes to that creative part of the brain and you forget about it and you move on. And I ended up writing a short story that we include in the book. It's at the very end. It's in the appendix, called Not Me, in which I'd written this so-called piece of fiction. And I had two sisters worried about inheriting Alzheimer's from their mother. And I gave it to the husband instead. And I even gave him Tony's middle name, Josephus. And I set a scene in Amsterdam where Tony's from. He's from Holland. So all these little things that I was doing, because that creative part of my brain was trying to process this. And what do I do with it? This can't be true. This can't be happening. So I'll make a story out of it. So yeah, that's an example of those early signs.
May I read this portion about?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. On this night, instead of feeding the cats, Tony had picked up their dishes, headed into the kitchen, and filled them with water. When he put the dishes down, he must have known something was wrong because there was already a water fountain for them. But he went and got more dishes, this time saucers, and then filled them up with water too. And then again, it wasn't that he had forgotten to feed the cats exactly, but halfway through the process of picking up their dishes, something in his brain switched off. And when he tried again, it switched off again, and then again. It was as though the minute he touched the objects, their purpose vanished, or they shape-shifted into something else, turning from food dishes into water dishes. Again, I imagined an electrical wire shorting out, but only in this case, even the presence of several vessels of water triggered no corrective thoughts, no reconnection of that wire. I came home to two very hungry cats and a perplexed Tony, who stared at the row of dishes of water as though seeing them for the first time.
Mm-hmm. And that's called visual spatial issues. When the person is looking at something and seeing it, but when it's processed into the brain, like visually, and then into the brain, it gets changed. And so, yes, you were trying to feed the cats, put food into the dishes, but every single time you grab those dishes, that thought
it was a strange thing. I remember it too. And it's like you turn into a robot, just for all of a sudden you walk up and then you're a robot. And so you start doing this, and you don't think about it. It's just not thinking at all. And it was really quite weird. And I was mortally embarrassed when I saw it because I thought, "Ooh, that looks really strange."
And that's part of the looping, the repetition, which is the case of the 4 umbrellas. That was another one where we packed to go to the Sylvia Hotel, as some of you know, when we had to escape construction in our building. And Tony packed his suitcase and thought, oh, it might rain. And he kept repeatedly packing umbrellas that when we got there were umbrellas crammed into every single corner of the suitcase. Plus, I had packed one, of course, that meant 5. And then when we were leaving to go out, he asked for an umbrella at the desk because he forgot his umbrellas. And so it's that looping that happened.
You started looking around for those, Googling Alzheimer's, and you found the Alzheimer's Society of Canada had the 10 warning signs. Mm-hmm. And that included like memory loss affecting day-to-day abilities, difficulty performing tasks, problems with language, disorientation in time and space. I think a lot of us understand that one these days because without our familiar markers of routine, it's impaired judgment, problems with abstract thinking, misplacing things, changes in mood and behavior, changes in personality, loss of initiative. That must have been difficult for you to see in your life partner. You guys have been together a long time.
Mm-hmm. We have 30 years. And so at this point, it would have been around the 20-year mark, and starting to see all of these changes. And initially, when I looked at that list, though, the interesting thing was I couldn't quite, because I was trying to figure out the cat dish one. How could this happen? And so I was looking for something on this list of warning signs to indicate what that was. And of course, that wasn't listed. There was nothing saying, okay, he's going to, screw up the cat dishes. That's not on there. But anything like that, mixing things up, that wasn't actually on that list. And the interesting thing is the very fact that I was looking at that list. Why was it? Why would you go there? Of course, there were other things happening that I was growing more and more conscious of. And I was hoping that I was wrong. And this list initially told me I was wrong, but in the process of looking at that list, I also was ignoring things like quitting a job he had loved for so long. That was your identity. There were a few cues there that I just chose not to see.
I was starting to get fearful about the whole thing too.
Yeah.
I couldn't quite figure out what was happening, but I sort of would dismiss it. I think about it. And then you force yourself not to think about it, put it that way. But yeah, I find it frightening, actually.
Your doctor went there with you, though, because your doctors were, initially, well, these are just signs of aging, right? You've got some of that response. Hey, you're doing pretty good. Oh, I forget things too. To have your medical professionals do that, that's tough.
Was very tough. And on the one hand, I kind of got that. I thought, well, who wants to be the one to deliver that kind of news? And so you pass the patient on to the next level. So the GP, Tony's doctor, said, well, we should send you to a gerontologist and maybe, they can analyze you and see what's going on. Maybe it's nothing, that kind of thing. Emergency ward, didn't do anything. They sort of sent Tony home like it was not a problem, and all these various professionals. But when we got to the UBC Center for Brain Health, and that's a marvelous institution. They give you the full workup, and that's when things started to happen for us.
The hospital thing was a good example because I came in sort of bleeding.
Emergency, yeah.
Yeah, emergency. And so the guy was asking me what happened. I said, I tripped or something, or slipped or something. I'm not sure. But I landed on my face. And he said, well, was alcohol involved? And I said, well, of course. It was nighttime. I said, no, I wasn't drinking heavily. I had a glass of wine or something. But that was his first thought. And he just dismissed. After that, it was like, yeah. And I thought, oh, okay.
Was this the time that you left a message for June that you'd gone to the hospital and she didn't know which one you'd gone to? And so it was obviously an anxious time, right? Yeah.
I was just leaving her a message. I thought, well, I'll just get zipped up and I'll come back. And that's what I always did before. So I thought it would be the same thing, but you kind of recognize it was more than that. So.
Yeah. Your situation almost seems hard to diagnose because you're so smart and you present so well and you converse so well and
I can hide things pretty good. and redirect, let's put it that way.
Yeah. There were many, many appointments I would sit through where they would start to interview Tony and just ask him questions. And if it got anywhere near American politics or what's going on in finance or any of those kinds of questions, he could just take off like a rocket. And I knew every time they asked questions like that, don't ask him that because he'll sound really smart. Ask him something basic like, what are your grandsons' names?
Yeah.
And that's where he always tripped up, was on really basic stuff like that.
Your initial visits with your physicians, there was actually tax implications of not having that diagnosis, weren't there?
Yeah, I don't quite remember what they were, surprisingly. But I remember it was a real problem. I hadn't paid my taxes for some time.
Yeah, GST payments
GST,
and various things like that, and mistakes on income tax. Yeah. But are you referring to the disability tax credit?
I am.
Yes. Yes. So we kept applying for the disability tax credit, and Sandy, this is something that might have applied with your mom as well, but if you apply for a disability tax credit, you have to get a doctor who is willing to sign and say, yes, this person has problems in X areas. It could be the ability to feed yourself, the ability to clothe yourself, bathe yourself, and so on. There's a whole list of disabilities. And if a person has Alzheimer's, it's kind of like, that's the golden card. It means that you don't have to fill out any of those details because that alone constitutes a disability, because it is all, it just affects everything about your life. Most doctors don't know that. And so you have to have it explained to them. And it was our accountant who actually explained how this form works. And in a sense, it's one of those Canada revenue forms, who can understand those? Yeah, so that was an issue, but it was the accountant who had to walk the doctor through it. Here's what you need to fill out. And as soon as she used the word dementia, bingo, we got it. But it took several tries to get that.
I've got a note from Janie Chang who says, given our demographics, I'd feel better knowing that GPs are made more aware of early onset Alzheimer's. Thank you for documenting your personal experiences as well as experiences dealing with the healthcare industry, Tony and June.
Oh, thank you, Jane.
I hadn't thought of that. Thank you.
I think that is so important because one of the things we look at in the book, and it was only research that showed us this, but anyone who is, say, they're given a diagnosis of any kind of dementia, but mostly it's Alzheimer's I'm focusing on. Let's say they're age 70 when they're diagnosed. Well, changes to the brain are happening 20 to 30 years beforehand. So in fact, that brain's going through all this stuff, 40 years old. Think about that. Think about that. Now, if doctors were aware of what those early signs are, they might not catch it that soon, but they're going to catch it way before the day of diagnosis. And I thought this was some major thing that I had discovered in my research. And we attended the UBC has an Alzheimer's update every year. And this year it was on Zoom, of course. And so we attended it. And the opening remarks from the speaker were, as we all know, changes to the brain are happening 20 to 30 years before. And I thought, okay, there it is. They're saying it too. But most doctors don't know that. Only these specialists in this rarefied atmosphere of the UBC Center for Brain Health, they're very aware of it. But a lot of your GPs and even some of the specialists don't know this and aren't really thinking in those terms. So if you go back that many years, you think about if somebody were diagnosed sooner and they discovered it, then things could be done to at least freeze it at that point so that it wouldn't go down the road another 20 years to become that much worse. And one of the studies that Tony is taking part in fact, we have a Zoom session with them in a week and a half, and that is on eyes. And it's looking at, it's called the Canary study, and it's looking at the fact that the part of the brain that controls eyesight is the same part where Alzheimer's is located. And so they think that this will take a few years, but if they can refine this, they think that a simple eye exam might be able to detect signs of Alzheimer's that much earlier. And imagine that if instead of this rigmarole we all go through, years and years of tests and being shuffled from doctor to doctor, if they could just sit you down in a chair and go bzzz, and tell you yes or no, you're starting to show those signs. I mean, they could theoretically arrest it right there. And that's, of course, what would be wonderful, absolutely wonderful. You just saw something that you...
Yeah, Jenny Gunn said, asked...
Early on.
Yeah, sorry. Did I ask myself what, was causing it? And did I get... Is it involving DNA and testing and all that stuff? I didn't get any of that, and I really feel stupid because I didn't. I don't know if I...
Well, they felt that there's two kinds of what people think of as hereditary Alzheimer's. There's familial Alzheimer's, and that's if you carry the gene. And if you carry the gene, then in your family, anyone in your family stands a 50-50 chance of getting it. It's a very high probability. But if you're like in my family, there's a fairly high incidence of Alzheimer's. It's kind of like there's cancer in your family. Doesn't mean you will get it, but it wouldn't be a shocker if you did. There is, so it has that trait there. And that's what Tony has. He doesn't have the familial Alzheimer's. So they would not bother going through all of that testing because that's quite rigorous and expensive. And it's more typical, that kind of the familial Alzheimer's, which is the genetic one, that is far more common with people who get it in their 40s and 50s. If you get it that young, boy, they're right on top of you and putting you through the whole battery of tests for DNA.
I remember when I heard that, my original father, after we came to Canada, was deported back to Holland. And I went and looked him up when I was 20, I think, 19 or 20. And my wild period in Europe. And he was still there. And I tracked him down, and he was pretty pitiful, actually. he lived on a boat with some dog and some big, tough, stupid guy. And it was kind of babbling. And I remember at the time thinking, like, he's got something, obviously, with him. I wasn't sure if it was Alzheimer's, but it was something with his brain. And I only recently thought, gee, maybe that was inherited. Maybe he was made Alzheimer's.
Well, he died of a stroke, so most likely it was vascular dementia if you had it, but maybe not. There's sometimes we can have a combination.
Pat Buckman and Texada wanted to know how long it had been since Tony's diagnosis. This was super recent, right?
It was very recent, yeah. No, the actual, he had a diagnosis that went in stages. The first thing they said is you have mild cognitive impairment, and that was in 2015. And mild cognitive impairment means you can improve, you can stay the same, or you can get worse. If you get worse, that's Alzheimer's. If you stay the same, it means, that head injury or something happened to you, and it's kind of permanent. And the improvement is, like some people who have strokes, they can go into rehab and they can retrain their brain to channel with other pathways, and they can be totally fine. Their speech comes back and so on. It doesn't have to be permanently disabling. And so that's why they use this diagnosis, and they admit that it's a temporary diagnosis. It's just until they can figure out if something else is going on. So that's what we started with, and then went down the road. And so it was about in 2017 when Tony had an MRI, and this is 2011 when he fell. Okay, so this is like many years down the road. So 2017, when Tony had the MRI, it showed very clearly in the MRI that he had Alzheimer's. He had shrinkage of the temporal lobes, which is right about here, kind of just in front of the ears. And that's the classic, that's the hallmark of Alzheimer's. And then it was the following year, 2018, when we actually got those results, because the MRI was taken in 17. It takes, like when you go to see a specialist, it's like 6 months to a year down the road to see the next one, right? And he also went through a day-long series of neuropsychological testing. And so that's 2018 when we got it firmly. Yes, he has it, but the government, again, that disability tax credit form made it retroactive to 2015, which was wonderful for income tax purposes because we got refunds on all that money and it helped us out tremendously. But it took from 2011 when he, keeled over in the kitchen until 2018 to be able to say for sure this is what he has.
Wendy Burton on Rainy Hornby says, did writing the book help you both emotionally?
Yeah, considerably. I came out, so to speak. I kind of hid everything before that as much as I could. Denial or whatever. So yeah, I don't mind it now. I don't mind being a spokesman for it and telling people I have it and all that stuff just because of the book. Before that, I wasn't real crazy about the idea, let's put it that way. However, June's very
what?
Persuasive. Persuasive.
Would you recommend GPs get more training on the issue given the aging population?
Absolutely, and I think that was something, was it Janie who mentioned that earlier as well? Yes, absolutely. I think that GPs, they are what we referred to as the front line. They are the very first people you see, the emergency room doctors and the GPs, and they should be able to detect it. And even Tony's, he had 2 GPs in a row because one retired. And the second one, when we went in, despite the fact there was a file in which the doctor had already said he was sent to a gerontologist for these various reasons, he really thought that Tony was okay because the first time he met him, he just talked a blue streak, as Tony does, yes. And so, he thought there's nothing wrong. And it was the second appointment we had with him when he was asking some very basic questions. And to each one, Tony had to look at me for the answers. And that's when he said, okay, we will send you for an MRI, for the testing out at UBC Center for the MRI. That's where they would do it. And yeah, that's what started things rolling. But yeah, he didn't know on his own that was an issue.
I think a lot of people, including doctors and stuff, I think they just presume you have to be very old.
Yeah, that's one of the mistakes.
I think that's the main thing. And if you present well, which I did, I think a lot of people go under the radar. And who knows what happens to them? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. There are a significant number of people, I believe, who on some of the marginalized members of the population through poverty, lack of education, and so on. They're on the fringes. And I think there are many, many people in that area too who are not being diagnosed. I think there could be language issues, there could be all sorts of issues that are stopping people from getting diagnosed. And again, going back to that fact that the brain could be changing 20 to 30 years before a diagnosis, there are probably, many, many people out there who are somehow just slipping under the radar. And I think it's something that really needs to be looked at because, someone who, as I said, the example I gave of age 70, somebody who's diagnosed at age 70, they didn't just wake up that morning and have it. It's a long, long process. And as you know, Jackie, that's my mother I'm talking about with the age of 70. Yeah.
If they had a diagnostic tool that could have told you something more when you were just kind of starting the absent-minded professor thing, would that have been helpful? Would you have wanted to known that was the path that you were on?
I'm not so sure. I don't know if I'd want to have heard it that early. I guess I did, but I don't.
I would.
She would. I think I would just try and fake it.
Yeah.
Pat wants to know about arresting the condition. What kind of actions have been helpful for you?
Ooh, that's a good one. It's made me slow down, for one thing, which is really good. I was always kind of speedy. I've had to look harder at myself, much harder. Instead, you have to get rid of the image, self-image that you have. And at first, that's not easy, especially if you're really involved in your self-image, because it's you. Basically, you've lost you, so you have to kind of build a new you.
You mentioned in the book that it was almost like it was kind of nice that some of the frenetic, the busyness of the brain was gone away, and in some ways it was like a benefit.
Yeah, it was peaceful. It was much more peaceful.
Restful.
I didn't have that little guy in the back of your head who's always telling you things. It's, whether you want to hear them or not.
Quieter. I think you took Aricept for a while, and that seemed to help.
Yeah, that helped a lot.
Yeah.
But in a way, it masked things for you, didn't it, June?
Yeah.
I think so. That and that I think was what Pat was asking as well. What were some of the measures to slow it down? And Aricept, there's another. There's a few of those drugs that are prescribed, and that when you prescribe them, right away that's Alzheimer's, because that's what Aricept is given for. But it immediately stops the repetition, makes the brain, it's kind of like super caffeine. The brain is just firing on more cylinders once you start taking that. But yes, the problem is that Tony then whizzed, like the test scores, he was just like, looked amazing. All of a sudden, like, nobody believes there's a problem. He's just going 100 miles an hour. So that was one of the downsides of it, but it certainly helped around here as far as function, just basic function. Other things Tony has done is a lot of yoga, meditation, exercise, really doing a lot of working out. And
a lot of yoga.
Yeah, and I think that helps. The calming helps too, with the disease in general. But the sad truth of Alzheimer's is it is a fatal diagnosis when you're given it, and there is no cure. So you can only, do so much.
Recently, I thought of many years ago, I was talking with a priest who works in the downtown east side all the time. And he was a real big, strong, tough guy, but he was a priest, and no nonsense for him. Anyway, he was telling me, we were talking about, having to, he worked with these people. So he was talking about having to deal with them. He said, everybody thinks they're all drunks, and you said, they drink. He says, but many of them have Alzheimer's. And at the time I didn't really,
What is that?
Yeah, well, I'd heard of it, but what is it? I don't understand. And he said, well, their brain's going wrong. It's not the booze. It's the fact that, they get bad food, so they don't get the right, all the right nutrition and things. He says, probably half of them have Alzheimer's. And I never forgot that. Well, I had run across over in my life people with Alzheimer's before. They just sort of went, and I thought, once I realized it and recognized and accepted that I had it, I thought, well, I better, clean up and all that kind of stuff. I don't know if clean up is the right word, but change my life. Let's put it that way.
That's fantastic.
Much calmer, less hype all the time, and stay away from all the tragedy and all that stuff, because it does affect you, even if you think it doesn't.
One time when we were having a disagreement about whether Tony should continue driving or not, and Tony, just to explain this, Tony drove a sports car, motorcycle, all this, like he was a driver. So this was really upsetting to him, a loss of control, to have anyone saying, maybe you shouldn't drive anymore. And this was after a few mishaps. And he was so angry. He said, if you talk to me like that again, I'll punch you in the face. And that was, yeah, we can laugh at it now. But at the time, it just was like, oh, what, you know? And I should assure everyone he never has. But it was one of those moments where you think, oh my God, who is this person? I don't know who this person is. Yeah. That was a tough one.
I remember that now, and I remember thinking, who am I?
Yeah, when it was very uncharacteristic for you. But not uncharacteristic of people with Alzheimer's. That's classic. That kind of anger it's lashing out, and it's not so much at the person standing there, who unfortunately is the receiving end, but it's at the condition. It's that this frustration, like how can this be happening, and it's anger because of the situation.
Okay. The strange thing was that's not my personality. How people, you know, I'll make them laugh. It's more like it.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had a lot of fights, but not because I wanted to. But you know, that's just not me.
No.
I think even as I said it, I was like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah. But it just kind of came out. Yeah, for a while there, I felt like I had another body at me, or another person in there for a while, who would show up every once in a while and get really, really fiery red eyes or something.
How have you been able to take care of yourself and get the kind of help that you need to make sure that you guys can stay on an even keel and in good humor?
Well, there's nothing like friends. Friends are wonderful in helping out. And I have to give a special thanks here. All my friends have been wonderful, but a special thanks to Terry, who's just been phenomenal. Absolutely. There's also been programs that have been extremely helpful. Tony is enrolled in an adult program called Paul's Club. And Paul's Club is for adults in the early stages of dementia. And so for me to be able to return to work, I couldn't leave Tony alone. I didn't feel comfortable with it. Tony felt he would be okay, but I felt he wouldn't be okay. So he's in this program, and it's absolutely fabulous. It's like a walking club.
Yeah.
They have great discussions. They're all, sort of fairly capable and on the young end. And they go for lunch at these nice restaurants, and they go for coffee and gelatos afterwards and all this. So they're, it's a nice place to be. And that kind of opened up my world right there.
Yeah. I think it's a gang. Everybody needs a gang. And I think one of the things I really felt bad about, and still do a little bit, is I don't have any friends anymore. And that happens to you when you get Alzheimer's. They don't want to know you, and you're weird and all that stuff. And you don't want to know them, frankly. So it's nice to go to them because it's somebody to talk to. And I mean, I still would like to, do things that I can't do anymore. But that's what fills it in. At least if you got somebody, instead of just you.
Yeah.
And that's hard on people to just all of a sudden leave your life and then not have another replacement. Basically, that's what it is.
We've actually had a couple of Tony's friends contacting him lately, and it's just with COVID-19.
Yeah.
But before we leave this topic, I did want to also mention that the Alzheimer's Society runs a support group for spouses. And so that's been really, really helpful for me. And it's specifically aimed at Young-Onset. So most of the people in that grouping are on the younger end, a lot of them still working. And one of them, I don't know if she's here or not, can't see everyone here, but Elise has been just fabulous. Really good buddy that I met there. The other thing is UBC Hospital itself. When we went out there for the diagnosis, when I said they give us the full makeup, it's not just other specialists until then have been just sort of focused on Tony and what he had, but it was the neurologist who sat me down and said, June, you're going to need help. And I was like, oh my God, somebody looked at me and said my name and noticed.
Right.
So that he lined up a social worker, a counselor, a psychiatrist, like all these places, right, resources for me. And it's been fabulous because it was some other place other than just, my own head And the two of us here was,
Half a head, yeah.
and, yes, the half a head over here. I actually had someone to talk to and work through all these things. And they're the people, as great as your friends are, it's only somebody else who's been through it who goes, I get it. You don't even have to finish that sentence. I get what's going on right now. And so that was just wonderful.
And what do we know? Everybody needs a gang, right?
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
just going to say that's a perfect description. Yeah, it can be very lonely at first if you don't have that structure around it.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And I sort of avoided it for a long time because I didn't want really everybody going,
You didn't want anyone to know.
well, it's
Yeah.
that, but also
Yeah.
like they start looking at you like you're weird.
Yeah.
And it has happened a few times with a few people. They
Mhm.
just look at you like, ooh.
Yeah.
And but then anyway, it's nice to have. You got to have friends. You got to have people
Yeah.
around you.
Jenny Gunn said, I'm really looking forward to the book. When does it come out?
October 17th, and it comes out as an ebook, paper book, and an audiobook on that date.